So what would you advise people out there that are thinking about it? Where do you start? I mean, I know every practice area is different, but how do you get started on that path?
Yeah, so we were pretty thoughtful about it. It's funny. So I had been thinking about document automation for a while. I was like, I knew it was out there. I would talk about it, and I wasn't acting on it, right? And then I don't know if this is going to translate to the podcast, but whatever. I was at dinner with my wife. We were celebrating something, and we were at like a fancy like omakase dinner. And there were these two guys next to us having a business dinner, and they were talking about this one guy's company that he was the CEO of, and had grown into like a 9-figure company and very successful. And this guy was so loud, like his voice just projected, and it was like really annoying. Like you were hearing every part of their conversation the entire dinner. And he's going on and on about their growth and everything. And I was like, who is this guy? And like, I got his full name just because he announced it at some point. Anyway, I come home and I Google him and read, and there's this really great article on him about how he built his company and like this vision he had, and how he started in his parents' basement and worked his ass off. It was actually like pretty inspiring. And I just remember like reading that and being like, what am I doing?
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. This is a podcast where I get to interview law firm founders and leaders and hear about their journeys and what they're doing with their firm and lessons they learned along the way. Today, we've got Kevin Cott joining us. He is the founder of COTT Law Group, which has a cool little niche that I guess there are attorneys out there that do this, but he's the only one I know. And I call it sort of investment fund representation. So we're going to dig into that and also, talk about his journey. He's had partners, he's not had partners, and we'll talk about some of that as well. So Kevin, welcome to the show. Hopefully I described your firm correctly, but why don't you give a little introduction, say, tell us a little about your firm, where it is, what you do, how many people on your team, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you nailed it. And first of all, thanks for having me on. I've really been looking forward to getting called up, so excited to do it. So yeah, my name is Kevin Cott. I'm the managing partner of COTT Law Group PC. We're a boutique law firm based in Atlanta. As Jonathan said, we really specialize in working with investment funds and advisors. And I can get into what that means, but that's our practice in a nutshell.
So when I hear investment funds, I think institutional money and I think Wall Street. So yeah. I'm curious, and you're based in Atlanta. So how does that come about? I would imagine that you would be in New York City or somewhere up there. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So there's really, a couple different kind of funds. You've got public securities offerings like mutual funds and ETFs and things like that. That's a whole different animal. We deal exclusively in private funds. So Regulation D offerings for alternative asset funds. And what that really means is like traditional hedge funds, commodity pools, private equity, venture capital, real estate. We do a lot in the cryptocurrency and digital asset space. So just kind of that, distinction between the different types of funds and what you maybe think of when you think of Wall Street. The New York part is true. Like there's, certainly most of our clients are in New York or California or Florida or Texas, wherever the investment centers are. But, and we can get into my background, but like, even when I started like early days, there were never like a lot of geographic constraints. It was always, if you knew your stuff, it didn't really matter where you were based. A lot of this practice is based on federal law. So it's not really, if you know your stuff and you're in Atlanta, there's really no friction to working with someone in New York. And then, post-pandemic, it's just like a first thing you talk about on a call and you move on.
So how did you get into the space? That's the other thing that's always sort of struck me. I love these, I don't want to call them weird, but interesting niche practice areas that, aren't mainstream. It's not like personal injury or criminal or family law.
Yeah.
So how do you get into something like this? Is this something you always wanted to do? You knew it coming out of law school, or did you sort of fall into it?
Fell right into it. So I had no plan. They always say like, don't go to law school because you don't know what you want to do. And I did exactly that. So went to law school, graduated, had no plan. I practiced commercial litigation for a year. I figured out pretty quickly that wasn't the place for me. It just didn't suit my personality. But I was a finance major in undergrad. And so when I realized commercial litigation wasn't for me, I was actually kind of like disillusioned about the practice of law and was thinking about going into finance like pretty strongly. And I just happened across an open position for an associate at another investment funds boutique based here in Atlanta and thought, that seems like a nice marriage of finance and law. I didn't know anything about it. I applied for it. I got the job. I started and just kind of took to it right away. It was like a much more exciting practice for me. It allowed me to leverage my finance background, and that was pretty much it.
So I imagine, with your finance background, you know how to talk spreadsheets. So you know how to talk with your clients, right?
Yeah, I'm sure you know this. Like with a lot of the subject matter, the law you need to know down cold. The actual financial lingo, like you just have to know enough to be dangerous so that you don't expose yourself on a call. So that's pretty much where I'm at.
Yeah, I know the other thing you said, and I experienced this. I know lots of lawyers experience this. I just think it's part of the natural part of being a lawyer. It's you come out of law school and you start doing something, and within 2 to 4 years, you're sort of like, I don't like this. And a lot of people, they're not sure, is it the law or is it the firm or maybe both? And so the first move is you go to another firm to see if was it the firm or was it the practice area or is it just the law?
Yeah.
And then some people end up leaving the law and some people sort of settle into their spot. And it sounds like that's what happened with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real common cliche. And I think that was my exact experience. And I was lucky because, the next position I took happened to be a really good fit. I think it was probably a little impulsive to think based on the first job that I didn't want to be in the law altogether, and we'll get into it. But I really had like an entrepreneurial instinct and I like running my own firm. And I think that has given me a lot more lasting power. I don't know if I would have liked being just an attorney for my whole career. And obviously that's, a topic we're going to dive into. But I think those two things, like finding the right practice and eventually starting my own firm, is where I really needed to land. And I was fortunate that I kind of got there relatively quickly.
It's interesting. There are some people that just are not employable. And then there are others that really should not be starting a business or trying to do that. So it sounds like you sort of knew you had that entrepreneurial spirit or whatever, but I'm always curious about sort of the spark that pushes somebody to actually say, I'm doing it. And so you said you were at a firm, you liked the work, but at some point you decided, hey, I'm gonna try to do this. What led to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty common theme, at least early on in my career, of being very impulsive. So, I liked the firm. I liked the people I worked for. I liked my boss. Like we're, all on good terms now. So it was a really good experience. It's not like something pushed me out, and caused me to start my own firm. It was, I've been there a few years. I learned the ropes. It wasn't even really something that at least consciously I was thinking about. And I remember one day, like out of nowhere, I had an epiphany. I remember it vividly, and just remember thinking, like, what if I just did this on my own? And I got really excited about it. And I think I informed my boss I was leaving like less than a month later.
Wow.
It's like I didn't put a lot of meticulous planning into it. At the time I was single, no kids, and candidly probably just being a little reckless. And I was like, I can do this, and I did.
Sometimes I think you need a little bit of that sort of
Yeah.
being naive a little bit, say, oh, this is easy, because
Yeah.
not knowing what you don't know, I think helps. So you within a month, so you didn't plan much. I guess you didn't have that many obligations, expenses, maybe you did, but in terms of war chest or book of clients or anything like that, did you have anything that helped once you started, or did you start at zero or maybe even negative?
Yeah. And, when I say a month, I mean, I, kind of like informed him that what I was doing, and then gave some runway and wrapped up stuff. So it took a little while, and I did have a little more time to plan. But no, I mean, I was lucky. When I left, I didn't bring any clients with me. I didn't try to. I didn't want to like burn those bridges. I just kind of let everyone know what I was doing, and it doesn't really work that way, at least at that point in my career. I brought over a legal assistant, and I started subletting space at an estate planning firm. So I had some overhead actually. And again, this probably ties back to the reckless part of it. Like, I was just assuming the work was going to come. But I did have a really solid network that I built up. So, in practicing it, I had to work really closely with not just a lot of clients, but a lot of other service providers and just people in the industry. And one thing that's kind of that's interesting about my practice is like the lawyers are very valued. We can send a lot of work to the fund administrators and the fund auditors and the brokers, and so there were a lot of people that I think made a very like conscious effort to reach out to me and I've got this project, maybe you can help with it, and that helped. And so I left in May of 2011, and I remember that first year I turned a small profit, and then the next year, my first full year, I made more than I had as an associate when I left, and it was, off to the races.
Addicted at that point, right?
Yeah,
It's nice when
exactly.
that happens. So let me ask sort of the mechanics of this practice, how you, and, share as much or as little as you want, but in terms of how you bill, and how you charge clients, is it hourly? Is it you get a retainer up front? Is it at the end of the deal when you close or whatever you get paid? I'm just curious in terms of the runway you needed once you actually signed a client to actually start getting paid.
So most of it's flat fee, which I like, and I think we'll probably get into that more later. But so if you come to me and say, I'm spinning out of a larger shop, I want to launch my own hedge fund, it's going to be a long short equity strategy, it's just myself, domestic fund, you kind of know the beats, and you quote a fixed fee for the whole project. And usually we would ask for, a retainer up front. It's earned upon delivery of the first draft of the docs. The remainder gets, paid out in stages. And so that's kind of the baseline project we work on. And then obviously there's all kinds of variations. There's hourly work. There's, and you have to be careful with your engagement letters. It includes this, but they may want you to negotiate like a really complex, side letter agreement with an institutional investor. And so that is separate, and you do it hourly, and you just kind of have pretty clear delineations. Yeah. So like when I went out on my own, it wasn't like, day one I was churning and billing, and, you had to land a few clients and know that the funds were going to come in.
So let's talk about landing the clients. That's the other thing. To somebody like me, the uninitiated, they seem very sophisticated and seem like they would be very picky about choosing their lawyer. It's not like you can just throw a Google ad up and all of a sudden you got these hedge fund people calling you and say, yeah, we're going with this guy. So how did you did not have any clients when you started. How did you sort of work? Is it contacts, referral sources, or is it actual clients? How did you sort of get that going, and how long did it take?
Yeah, it took a while, and, we've done it all over the years. So like early on, I didn't know what I was doing. I was using Google Ads, I was partnering with other service providers, and they'd be like, we have this whole pipeline we're going to send you, and you do it for this reduced fee. And you're like, that sounds great. And it's never great. And then, attending lots of conferences, and, you just kind of figure it out. And again, I think all of that was just kind of me trying to figure out other ways, but really it was having this tight network that, knew that I'd worked with closely. They, knew I did high quality work, and wouldn't make them look bad to their clients. And that was really what was driving it. But now it's like a kitchen sink approach. We do a little bit of everything, but the vast majority of our clients are from our existing clients, which is the best referral you can get. It's obviously someone who's worked closely with you. They have a network, all these people, a lot of these fund managers know other existing and prospective fund managers. And so when they say, my lawyer did a great job, I want you to talk to him, that gets you, over halfway there right away.
It's also the cheapest acquisition that you can get, right?
Yep.
It's funny. I was talking to an attorney yesterday about, as you grow a firm, you're going to spend all this money, and you have to. You got to spend money here, you got to spend money there. and you just got to know it's not all going to work. So you're going to end up looking back saying, damn, I wasted money there, I wasted money here. But some of it is going to work. So it's like you just don't know, but you sort of have to go through it, I think. So it sounds like you did.
Yeah, I mean, and there's no, I guess certain practices, maybe there is almost like a playbook. But I think for most of us, it's like you got to go through that trial and error because, a lot of it depends on your practice. It depends on your personality. It depends on your particular circumstances. And so you got to try it. And it's cost of doing business.
So the other thing I want to talk to you about, so you started your firm. At some point, I think you were in a partnership and you're no longer in a partnership. I'm curious, share what you're willing to share. But, a lot of folks think about, having partners or going into a partnership. Some think about it more deeply on the front end than others. Even those that do explore it for an extended period of time and really dive deep, it doesn't always work out. And so I'm just curious what your experience was, without a partner, with a partner, maybe without, and any lessons or advice you might have for others out there that might be thinking about going into a partnership.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that's a pretty, common question for anyone who starts their own firm and something you're going to have to navigate, whether you do it or not, just kind of, evaluating what you're looking to do, what the opportunities are. So for me, I launched the firm, built it up for about 6.5 years. And then we partnered with another law firm at the start of 2018. So, and then did like a full lift out of our team in practice at the start of 2020. So I had a partnership experience that did not work out for all kinds of reasons that, are not worth getting into. But my main takeaway was that it didn't in any way sour me on partnerships. I just think that would be the wrong conclusion to draw. And I've given this a lot of thought, it's a kind of long-winded answer, but, I would say, a lot of the lawyers are pretty cautious by nature, right? You get people who are very detail-oriented, identify all the risks, they kind of think through all the possible outcomes, and that can make for a great lawyer. It's not necessarily, personality traits that always make for a great entrepreneur. And so I think you also have to be willing to go outside your comfort zone and take risks. And so in my case, I've never really been risk averse, and that served me well. But what I realized, you can also go like too far the other way. And as my wife can attest, like I can be a bit of a Pollyanna and like try to talk things into existence. And so I think the lesson for me was like, if you push ahead with something just because you want it to work, and ignore what in hindsight were some like pretty obvious red flags, like you kind of have no one to blame but yourself when it doesn't work out. And so that was a lesson for me. It's just, be smarter, not, let this taint how you look at partnerships, period. That wasn't the lesson at all.
I think that's a great point. Because I do a lot of, law firm breakup type work.
Yeah.
And there are people out there that say, I'll never have a partner ever again. And, maybe that's the right move for them. Maybe, some people maybe are just not suited for it. But then I know other folks that have been partners for 30 years and it's like perfect. I mean, don't even have, it's a handshake. It's just perfect. It works. I mean, I guess it's like a marriage, right? I mean, you may end up getting divorced, but does that mean you're never going to date anybody again or do it again?
I was going to make the exact same point.
Yeah.
Like, exactly. Like you have people that say, I'll never get married again. And maybe you shouldn't, I don't know. But, there are wonderful marriages that last a lifetime and terrible marriages that are doomed from the start. Like it's specific.
Yeah. So let's talk about your firm setup now. So at some point, you may have said the year, but you sort of went back out and then you're independent again, I guess, no partners, but you've been growing. So, you may have mentioned it earlier, but how many attorneys you have, how many staff, and then maybe are you in office, hybrid, virtual? I'm sort of curious to set up.
Yeah. So we're 6 attorneys, 2 of counsels, and then we've got 3 other staff, one, our COO, Emily, and then 2 other staff underneath her. So we're 9 people in total. We are, all but one of us is based in Atlanta. So we have one that's fully remote, and then the rest of us are all here, and we're hybrid. I am in the office pretty much every day because I selfishly set the office right by my house. It's like a mile away. Everyone else is like 3 days a week, typically in the office, and we're pretty flexible with that.
So take me through your growth evolution? When did you start adding attorneys? When did you know it was time? And then how has it sort of evolved over time in terms of, you got 6 people now, so.
Yeah. So it was just piecemeal. So I think I hired my first associate like 2016, and then the second one 2018, and then we've had a couple come and go, but we really haven't had much turnover. We added another one a couple years ago, and then we've got another associate that just started after being an intern for us last month. And we've just kind of grown based on need, and it's really been a lot of growth, honestly, in like the past 5 years. So we relaunched in 2020. We haven't we've increased our capacity a lot. We've added more attorneys, and I think we've had a steeper uphill trajectory since then.
So we'll get into this in a minute, but 2020, I bet you the crypto work started coming in strong, but we'll get to that in a second. But
Sure.
So again, you've got this very focused niche practice that maybe there are a ton of lawyers out there that do it, but it just sort of strikes me that it would be hard to find people that have the expertise that you need. So I'm curious, how are you finding the people? Is it the kind of thing where if they've got a couple skill sets, you'll train them on the rest? I'm sort of curious about that part.
That's a great question. So, we would certainly welcome a lateral hire that has experience in it. We did that once with someone that had like an adjacent experience, but that it ended up not working out. And it's because that's not the only variable, right? And so for me, I found it more helpful to find the right fit, like just, personality wise, and what I think of them as, in terms of like potential, and then train them. And so all our attorneys did not have experience in this practice when they started, and there certainly is, a period of growing pains and kind of getting them up to speed. But I think it's worth it. I think if you find the right person, and I'm a big believer in like, culture and personality, and that less so than very specific experience, and I think the rest can come.
Yeah, I asked because like, excuse me, with like my practice area, there really aren't a whole lot of people out there doing exactly what I do. There are people that do sort of pieces of some of what I do, but broad strokes, I've got sort of an advisory practice, and then there's a transactional component, and it's not like, or family lawyers, there are tons of them, and you can sort of pluck somebody from another firm or whatever, and there's just a bigger pool of candidates. And so like for me, my thought has always been find, sort of what you just said, but also maybe a practice area that has a similar sort of setup. So in my mind, I was always like, well, employment lawyers, employer side employment lawyers sort of fit that for me. So they've got an advisory practice, but then they also have the pseudo transactional, and then some of them do some litigation too. So I've always thought that maybe that's where I would look. So I guess you have found maybe some adjacent or similar, I guess, structured practice areas that you can pull from.
Yeah, so mine is just kind of all circumstance, to be honest. I mean, we're a small firm, so it's not like we have 30 attorneys and you kind of start seeing patterns emerge. And so there are practices that I think lend themselves to what we do pretty well, like a corporate attorney that maybe doesn't have investment funds experience, but spends a lot of time drafting LLC operating agreements and just kind of understands a lot of the tangential work that we do, would be a great starting point. It just hasn't worked out that way. Instead, it's been a lot of like, fresh attorneys that are right out of law school, and we've trained them, and I think we've done a good job of like picking the right people that were able to grow with us and ended up being a good fit. But it could just as easily be someone from an adjacent practice that actually makes a lot of sense.
Real quick, if you haven't gotten a copy yet, please check out my book, The Law Firm Lifecycle. It's written for law firm owners and those who plan to be owners. In the book, I discuss various issues that come up as a law firm progresses through the stages of its growth, from just before starting a firm to when it comes to an end. The Law Firm Lifecycle is available on Amazon. Now back to the show. So I want to shift gears a little bit. Another thing that
Yeah.
we've talked about a little bit, but I want to really dive a little deeper is sort of your use of technology in your practice. I know you've probably sampled a lot of software and you've built a lot of automations and you've sort of really invested on the technology side. And I'm curious, maybe take me through some of that. You don't have to give away your secret sauce, but
Yeah.
what led you down that path? I mean, I think the fact that you do flat fees, probably like, I'm going to try to be as efficient as I can on the delivery side. But how do you find the software you use, and how do you build it out? Is it you or is it consultants?
It's me. Yeah. And the flat fee point's a really good one. I mean, it reminds me of something, so I'm just going to get on my soapbox for like a second. I think not. I think the traditional law firm billing model is pretty antiquated. There's just a misalignment of incentives. The idea that, if you're the client, you want the work to be done as efficiently and cost effectively as possible without losing any quality, right? And if you're the attorney, whether it's intentional or subconscious or whatever, you know, the longer it takes, the more money you make. And so there's just this natural friction. And I mean, look, there's practice areas where that's inevitable. I mean, if you're in litigation, like the time is the time. But I think for a lot of transactional practices, I just think it's a tough model, and things like AI are just going to blow it up. And so we were really well positioned in the fact that we were already a flat fee practice. And so for us, just being able to look at it, less of a you know hourly billing model and more of delivering the best possible product allowed us to align incentives. And so anything we can do to make a higher quality product more efficient, everyone wins. And so that kind of leads to technology. And so things like automation, whether it's on the document side or our workflows, and integrating AI is just a value add for everyone. And so, yeah, happy to kind of jump into what we've been doing.
Yeah, I
Um,
want to dive deep, but one thing you mentioned, it's interesting. I'm a big proponent of just value billing, basically, and so
right.
it's the value to the client, and even on the litigation, it's interesting. I spoke to somebody maybe last week, so it'll be a podcast. It will have been released by now, that is doing family law litigation as a subscription, which I was blown away that anybody would even try it, let alone be able to make it work. I've heard
Right.
of family law in these sort of phased flat fee things, but litigation, other than time, everybody says it cannot be done. It's just that's the universal truth, cannot be done. But there are people out there that are actually playing with some models, and then you add the AI component in there. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, even on the litigation side, in the coming, I don't know, decade, we'll call it. But so let's talk about some of your how did you get into it? I know personally, I'm like, there's all these things we can push into technology and help make more efficient, but sometimes it seems so overwhelming because there's so much to do. So what would you advise people out there that are thinking about it? Where do you start? I mean, I know every practice area is different, but how do you get started on that path?
Yeah. So we were pretty thoughtful about it. It's funny. So I had been thinking about document automation for a while. I was like, I knew it was out there. I would talk about it, and I wasn't acting on it, right? And then I don't know if this is going to translate to the podcast, but whatever. I was at a dinner with my wife. We were celebrating something, and we were at like a fancy like omakase dinner. And there were these two guys next to us having a business dinner, and they were talking about this one guy's company that he was the CEO of, and had grown into like a 9-figure company and very successful. And this guy was so loud, like his voice just projected, and it was like really annoying. Like you were hearing every part of their conversation the entire dinner, and he's going on and on about their growth and everything. And I was like, who is this guy? And like, I got his full name just because he announced it at some point. Anyway, I come home and I Google him and read, and there's this really great article on him about how he built his company and like this vision he had, and how he started in his parents' basement and worked his ass off. It was actually like pretty inspiring. And I just remember like reading that and being like, what am I doing? Like, automate your docs. And that was the thing that like pushed me over the finish line. But anyways, and then, from there I got really fired up and, found the right software, and like I wouldn't stop until I basically automated our hedge fund offering documents template, where you have, a list of questions like an intake questionnaire, and that populates the documents and you have to go through it line by line. And so from there we really designed our approach. And so, I viewed it as sort of three phases. The first one is document automation. So that's primarily Word document automation, exactly what I just described. You take all your templates, you have like a really like well thought out, list of questions that populates the documents. And what you're able to do is, draft documents much more quickly. It reduces errors. It allows us to spend much more time focusing on like custom bespoke provisions rather than using, control F and looking for past examples. It's just, it's inarguably better. And so that was kind of phase one. And then once we had a pretty good handle on that and had spent some time getting it in place, the next one was automating our workflows. And so, what that means is, potential client reaches out, and from there everything is automated, from scheduling the consult to sending an intake form to, converting them from our CRM to our practice management software, sending form emails and documents depending on the type of project, et cetera. And then if you want to get in the weeds, like we also use Zapier, or however you pronounce it, to create automations between, our CRM and some project management software and other software services like Trello and MailChimp. And that's really neat. For example, if someone talks to me about launching a domestic hedge fund and they're like, all right, that sounds great, let's move forward. I convert them. We use Clio. So I convert them from Clio Grow to Clio Manage. And in that process, it automatically connects to Trello and creates this like pre-populated checklist for the whole team to see of like new domestic fund launch. Here's all the 27 steps. And it's just really seamless and cool. And all of that's been a ton of work. It's not, I don't want to make it sound like it's something you can just like do overnight. It required me to learn a whole new skill set. But once it's set up properly, it's like you make up the time like that. And you had mentioned consultants, and I know that's out there where you can hire someone to kind of do, it's not coding, because I wouldn't be able to do that. It's just, really like learning the software and then taking the time to go through your documents line by line, or designing an elegant solution. And like with the workflow stuff, I just don't know how a consultant would do that, because you really have to think through it start to finish. Like, what are my, your processes better than anyone else. Like, how do I want this to look and have like a really like elegant, streamlined approach? And it's going to change. It's, you're going to have to like maintain it. So I think if you don't know how to do all that, I don't know, just personally, I think it's worth the investment. And then, the other thing I would say about that is you also want to be careful about it, because you can get so caught up in the technology that you forget that like this is client facing. You don't want them to feel like they're communicating with a bot. Just kind of thinking about how you are on the other side. Never remove the human element. It should never feel automated. It just should be. And then the last piece of it is integrating AI. And so we've, as a team, after we had the kind of first two pieces in place, we looked at a slew of different options. We ultimately chose one that just kind of seemed the best suited for our particular practice. And like, we're in the process of implementing it right now. And so it's early days, but it's, impressive.
A lot to unpack there, but the one thing that it's funny you mentioned sort of the human element, and you don't want it to feel like a bot. So I'd say maybe, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, there's a service offering that our firm does that I think every small firm needs. And it's really sort of I call it the hit by the bus plan. And so I spent probably 5 months designing the whole thing, all the documents, all the email communications, all the stuff. And then I put it into this automation software, and it was just like pristine and perfect. I was like, this is awesome. And then I went to some people and said, hey, I'll do it for free. I want you to test this system out. And what I found pretty quickly is it worked perfectly, but no one ever finished it. They always like stalled out one thing. And then there were these automated reminders And then people are like,
Yeah.
man, you got to turn that shit off. It's like they keep emailing and they get it done. And I learned a lot of lessons there. And I guess the big one was make sure the market wants to buy what you're selling before you spend all this time doing all the stuff. Because I spent a ton of time and energy in that, but I learned a lot. And the other thing I learned that I thought was interesting is you sort of alluded to it. When you design these automations, because it is it's a basically computer program, if this, then that kind of thing, you got to make sure that the steps are perfectly set up if it's going to be automated. Where a human can jump around, the bot is going to go down the program, and if one piece is off, then the whole thing might fall apart. So that's the other lesson I learned is you really got to sit down if you're going to do automations, really think through how it's going to work before you put it into the automation software, because then you're like redoing, undoing.
Yeah.
What was your experience actually building? Did you experience anything like that?
Exactly that. So you have to be very flexible, because what happens is, you start getting really precious about it and like trying to perfect every detail. Like, you're designing some, you know, grand thing. And I definitely got caught up in that a couple times. And so, I think for like internal stuff, like, when we needed to figure it out so that when we convert a client, it populates Trello, like that is a process that's not going to change. And you need to make sure that everything is working properly so that there's no errors and nothing gets lost. But I think with the client facing stuff, you have to be a lot more flexible. Like, I had this plan of like you start a workflow and everything is automated. You never look at it again. But you're right. You don't want clients to be getting reminders that are annoying. You don't want it to feel robotic. And so you end up using pieces of it, instead of, in the past, I would send an engagement letter via DocuSign or attached as a PDF. And, now it's all, we have these pre-populated templates and you put in the specifics and you send it via Clio, and it's just much smoother. And so that part, is one of the big lifts, but it's okay if it doesn't also have like a reminder attached to it. Like you got to figure it out and kind of use pieces of it. And depending on the situation, maybe you don't do like a whole automated workflow, you just automate something. And it's, everyone's practice is different.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about AI and figure out how you're using it. I'll tell you like what I have one idea that I've seen some YouTube videos, not in a law context, in different contexts, but it got me to think it would be so awesome is that, from my practice area, we've got to run conflict checks and open matters and all that kind of stuff, where I could see somebody designing some sort of AI where you just grab your phone and you just talk into it and you say, this client name, adverse name, and then the AI would know to ask you the follow-up questions of the information it needs, and then boom, the automation started. It sends out the conflict check email, gathers the responses. If there's no conflict, then it creates the engagement letter, the matter, all this stuff. It's like, that stuff is doable and it's really cool, and I haven't done it yet, but that's my dream. So I'm curious what you see some of the uses for your practice and maybe any practice in general with AI, and maybe how you're beginning to implement that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the possibilities are endless for sure. And you start getting like agentic AI, and we're not even experimenting with that stuff yet. Like for us, like I said, it's like early days, and we're just using it right now as a tool. So if we're reviewing a contract for a certain party, you use it as the first layer. Identify what's market, identify what's not market. We need a different indemnification provision, like help us create this. And so it's not replacing anyone. It's just this really powerful tool that you can harness that we want everyone to be familiar with, and kind of have processes in place where you can do this first layer of work very quickly, very efficiently. And then, but it's not the finished product. The attorney has to review it. The attorney has to think about where they want to use it and where they don't. And a lot of it for us right now is just like reviewing documents and drafting. But there's very specific use cases too. Like we do, like due diligence reviews of like other fund offering documents. And so it just cuts time to have, AI go through and summarize it for you and identify things for you. And then from there, you do the second layer and actually verify everything and check it. But, you can make a million analogies, whether it's, legal research going to the internet versus, books. I mean, it's just, you just see these progressions in technology, and you have to embrace it because it's inevitable.
So let me ask a sort of a logistical question with AI. I'm curious what your experience has been. So if it's just me or just you using AI, whatever software you use, platform is pretty straightforward. But when you have a team and you have a giant workflow, do you have these enterprise accounts where everybody has access and you can create projects that are used across the team, that they always use this sort of agent or whatever you've set up? Or is it
Yeah.
everybody's on their own and they log into their own little ChatGPT account or whatever?
So the one we chose, it's, I guess, an enterprise account, and everyone has it. And then you can design it. You can like upload, your own, resources and documents for it to kind of use as benchmarks. You can, create workflows in terms of like check this, and this for this type of contract. And so again, like we're just now building it out. So I don't know if I have all the answers, but it's something like that, where I think just like the automated workflows, just like the document automation, like you really have to like think through start to finish what you want, come up with an elegant design, come up with an approach that you can teach other attorneys and that we all use. And that's what we're playing around with and figuring out now.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I think current state of AI in some circles is a little overhyped, I think. And then the other thing that more and more I'm hearing people, it's the AI bubble, and they're comparing it to the .com bubble, which I think is probably a pretty good analogy. And
Probably, but it's still an apt analogy, right? Like there
yeah,
was a .com bubble, but the internet changed everything. It was
exactly,
transformative.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's not going away. It's going to crash. I don't know when. It's just if you read some of the numbers of the dollars and the capex and all this that they're investing in it, they're going to be people that lose their ass. But just like the internet, for the next 20, 30 years, it is going to be a part of everybody's life. So it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of plays out. So I want to switch again. I want to talk crypto. So you do crypto funds. How much? Well, we can get to the fun part if you want, but really, how much have you been in crypto, like the space? Do you just do the funds, or are you all in the space as well, and you're really knowledgeable about it?
Somewhere in the middle. So we're still predominantly an investment funds practice. So we have a lot of visibility into like like crypto, but non-crypto funds, like startups and things like that. But that's not what we do. It's more, connecting them to other, referral source or law firms we work with that, maybe specialize in like standing up a, crypto startup or setting up a foundation or whatever that might be. It'd be nice to do that in house at some point, but that's not our focus. So for us, it's more on the fund side. So one thing we've gotten plenty of things wrong. One thing we got right was we embraced crypto pretty early. So, it started becoming this kind of like bubbling asset class back in like 2015 or 16, I would say. And at the time I had an associate that was kind of into crypto and talking to me about it. And he was like, we should probably look into that. And he was right. And so we did our first crypto fund back in 2016. It was like a Bitcoin only fund. And then from there, it just, we spent a lot of time and resources kind of learning the space, like, really understanding, the regulatory implications, like what the asset class actually was, how to draft risk disclosures that
It's
matched it.
interesting. That was a question. So I remember, was it a security or was it a commodity? And different regimes would apply.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you had to learn all that, right?
All that.
Have they settled that? Have they settled that?
Sort of.
Okay.
I mean, it all depends, right? Like there's, all this case law and like Ripple and things like that, and what's an investment contract, and a lot of it just depends on the details. Like, if it meets like the Howey test, it's going to be a security. If it doesn't, it's not. But yeah, so we started to kind of do a lot of crypto funds, and then we evolved with it. I mean, we've seen everything from these Bitcoin only funds to the expansion of other altcoins to DeFi strategies to the growth of like blockchain venture funds. And, it was really interesting. And then I do think we've established ourselves as one of the preeminent firms in the country for that kind of work in particular. That said, we made a very deliberate point not to just be a crypto funds practice. I think there are others out there, who will certainly disagree. And there's certainly firms that like, they become hyper specialized and they're just all in on crypto, whether it's funds or startups or, just advising anyone in the digital asset space. But I don't know. I just think that's risky and can kind of cause you to lose objectivity. You don't want to be a cheerleader. You want to like really just have it fit within your practice. And so that's where we landed. But yeah, during the crypto bull markets, it was like, you know, it really led to a lot of growth at our firm. I mean, it was 70 to 80% of the funds we were launching, not by design, just based on demand, because there were periods there where, I mean, if you had established yourself in the space, you were just getting like, you know, 3 inquiries a day. And so, but what would happen is, you know, as the price of Bitcoin then fell, it would just disappear and everything would rebalance. And so what's been interesting is like the latest cycle, we've been much more balanced, where we're still doing a lot of crypto, but I think it's a healthier balance of like traditional hedge and venture and private equity and real estate. And so now it's kind of matured into a, you know, I wouldn't say like predictable or, you know, I mean, it still fluctuates, but it's just like a big part of our practice, but not something that we like ebb and flow with.
You know, along with a ton of others, I got sort of into the crypto, you know, some years ago, and it was fun. It was
Yeah.
Wild West crazy stuff. And, you know, one of the questions that everybody had on Twitter is sort of like, what's the use case? You know, what's the use case? And so, you know, Bitcoin, it's sort of store of value. That's, you know, it's not really going to be used as a medium of exchange. Is sort of where everybody fell. And then all the other stuff, you know, I'm curious your thoughts, but before I throw that to you, you know, there's recently, I don't even know what it's called, but some legislation that went through about stable
Yeah.
coins. And have you seen anything? Do you have any opinions? Is that changing what, you know, people are coming to you for?
Yeah. So the Genius Act, I think, is
Yeah, that's it.
the legislation you're talking about. So we follow it. You know, it obviously impacts our clients a lot, and they're really invested in it. It doesn't, you know, the use of stable coins doesn't really affect our practice much. It's so I don't know if I have any profound thoughts on them. You know, they're obviously a big part, you know, of many of our crypto fund clients' investment strategies. You know, we follow the regulatory developments like the Genius Act. You know, and for I guess those that don't know, it's just the federal legislation that is aimed at regulating stable coins and creating a regulatory framework around them. You know, I think stable coins in particular, like they have a ton of use cases, whether it's, you know, trading on crypto ecosystems or earning yield or like helping underbanked populations. But candidly, like there are others out there that can speak much more intelligently about it than I can. Like we just kind of monitor it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You know, I like to, I'm no
Yeah.
expert by any
So
means, but
are you invested in it? Did you like dabble?
oh, I dabbled. Yeah.
Okay.
I won big on some and lost big on others. So yeah, probably a
It's
net neutral at the end of the day. But yeah, it was fun. I'll say
it's
that.
funny. I early on, I mean, it's not changing my lifestyle or anything, but I bought like a little bit of Bitcoin, and I remember telling my wife at the time, I was like, I have to. I was like, it's like R&D for my practice. You know, I really need to like, but I just wanted to do it.
Yeah. You know, I remember, so back in 2000, it was in the wake of the GFC, Great Financial Crisis. I
Yeah.
remember, I don't know if it was 2010, 2011, I remember reading about Bitcoin and that you could
Mm.
just buy a computer and mine it. And I remember thinking, hey, I want to do this. I was like, I want to do this. And then I got distracted and I never did it. And I think back, man, if I had just done that.
It's, it's so funny. It's like I have a really good friend who swears he thought of Facebook in college before Mark Zuckerberg, but he didn't act on it.
Exactly.
It's just-
Exactly. Well, you know, it's funny. Like I've had a few of those things in my life where like I
yeah.
didn't act on it, and it has changed my behavior. So like this firm I'm building now, I sort of had an epiphany that I was like, I can build this thing, and so I've been acting on it like crazy ever since. I'm never going to let this pass me again. I
Yeah.
missed Bitcoin. I'm not going to miss this. So of
Yeah.
course, this will
It's
not
a
be
lot of fun
anywhere
though.
near as big as Bitcoin, but yeah, I'd be a
Nah, you
gazillionaire
know,
if I had just mined some.
or you'd be one of those people who lost the key and it haunts you
Exactly,
forever.
exactly. I
You never
lost
know.
it. It'd be in
Yeah,
a
maybe
landfill
maybe you
somewhere.
spared yourself.
Yeah, it'd be in a
Yeah.
landfill that I'm trying to get in there and search for. But anyway,
Right.
well, that's cool. So shifting again. So you know you've been building this firm for a number of years now. As you look back, I'm curious any lessons learned maybe. You know, the way I like to frame it is things maybe you did that you said maybe I shouldn't have done that, or the flip side is things you did but you wish you'd done way earlier.
Yeah, I guess like on the not done part, I mean, there's a million things I could say, but like I don't regret any. Like it's all part of the process, right? You know, I think you learn from your mistakes, you get smarter. Like there's nothing that's like hampering my practice now that I regret. I don't, that's kind of a cheesy answer, but it's true. As far as like things I wish I had done sooner, if I'm being honest, I just kind of wish the light bulb had gone off sooner, like, or gone on sooner. Like, I look back at what I was doing for like the first several years and it was fine, but I just don't think I had like the same motor that I have now, and especially like being in my mid 40s now and, just everything that's going on, getting the kids ready for school and going to all their games. And it's like, I had so much time back then. I wish I had been just as motivated then as I feel like I am now.
Yeah. People have always said, I'd always heard that sort of the golden years or the best years of a lawyer is like basically 45 to 60. That's when you're just hitting your prime.
Yeah.
And then, and I think it's not necessarily that age, but it's a certain time past law school. So there's some people who went to law school a little earlier, that maybe that starts a little early. Maybe there's people that started later, so they push a little later. So you're entering into the golden years, right?
Yeah, I get that. I think there's also just, some people are very type A and like they're just driven from the day they're born. And that wasn't me. Like I really had to like learn it. I think I had a tendency to be a little lazier when I was younger. And then at some point, the light bulb went on and I just kind of really realized like professionally, like I want to reach my full potential and that drives me. But yeah, for whatever reason, it took a little while to hit.
So let's talk about that. So you're in it,
Yeah.
man. What's your vision? What have you thought about that? Where do you want to take this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to be the best investment funds boutique in the country. Like, I think we have that capability. I think we're on that direction, and that's what I want. And what does that mean is really the question. I think that's having great people, great work product, a really innovative tech forward approach, and just having a service that I think is top of the line. And what I've realized too is you can get caught up in comparing yourself to others and like head counts and things like that. And I realize I don't care about head count. Like what I want is to have like the best profit margin, and just like really be an efficient machine that does great work.
Well, it's interesting, with the automation, the AI and all that, you're sort of moving that way. I've heard a lot of people talk about, is there going to be a first $1 billion one person company because of AI and all this stuff?
Yeah.
So there's all this speculation. Is it going to happen?
Yeah.
And who it might be? Is there anybody we can pick and say that's going to be the person? So it's interesting. I would love to have a one person $1 billion company. That'd be incredible.
Sure.
Yeah.
That won't be us. And,
Yeah.
I will say, like, we're talking about AI and I'm excited about it. And it would be naive to pretend that it's not going to affect like hiring decisions in the future and things like that. But I can confidently say like it doesn't affect our team. Like it's a tool, and you have to have attorneys to do it. And it's never gonna, for us, replace people.
Well, I'll tell you, the people business is hard. Every time you add a new person on the team,
Yeah.
it's just, managing people. It is an art, not a science. And it's, some people are better at it than others. And I've got a lot to learn on that for sure. But so one last question and then we'll sort of wrap up. So for anybody out there who's, thinking about starting a firm or maybe in the early stages, what advice maybe would you have for those people in terms of getting their firm going and making it work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not particularly risk averse, so I would say if you're thinking about it seriously, you should probably do it. Don't do it if you're, just kind of dabbling with the idea and having to give it some real thought. But like, similar to kind of the things we were talking about where it was like, we had ideas and we didn't act on them. Like if you're serious and that's something you're driven to do, you should just do it. Specifically, I think like once you do, there's a lot of great advice out there. One thing I've learned is don't mistake activity for being productive. There's a lot of like playbooks to follow and you have to go to this conference and FOMO and, you're doing all these things and talking to all these people, but like, don't do it just to check boxes. Like figure out what actually works for you. It's going to be different for everyone and spend some time really evaluating that and like spend your time wisely. Same.
Time here and there.
Yeah.
So yeah, do the things that work. So Kevin, man, this has been fun. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing, your stuff. If anybody wants to find you, what's the best way?
Yeah. So email's best. I'm easy to find. You can reach me at kevin@cottlawgroup.com. You can also, check out our website at cottlawgroup.com, and I'm on LinkedIn, and hopefully, we've talked about it. I'll be a little more active on there and you'll see me on there as well.
And that's COTT, COTT So,
Yep. So yeah, Kevin at COTTLawGroup.com and www.COTTLawGroup.com.
Well, cool, Kevin. Thanks again. Appreciate it, and have a good weekend, man.
Thanks, Jonathan. You too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.